She had never set upon me where anyone else could see. I thought it was because my father, after all, was our Re, the lord and king of our tooth. He was Fallen's brother, true enough, but I was his daughter, and one of my brothers some day would take my father's place. Fergal and Treon were fostered out now, living close to the sea with another tooth, learning trades, but they would come home once they were grown. She would not dare bully them then, nor me. As I ran flying along on both hope and fear, I was beginning to smile to believe I would escape, when my toes struck a hard edge, cool and straight, unlike rock or grass or tree wood. I stumbled to an ungraceful halt, thinking might be some sliver of bone, or with astounding luck a comb. My mother had found hers, and it was a grand one, made from elk antler, with a design of carved knots on it. Excited, hoping that the saints or the fairy folk had pitied my thudding heart and given me a fine comb to replace Fallen's cracked one, I dug at the soil. When I had freed it, I waved the object on my woolen brat. It was not a comb. I took in a quick breath. It was a perfect oval of gold, and within it was fastened a horse shape beaten from the same pure metal. The little gold horse was galloping, its mane and tail streaming out behind it. There was a sharpened wire folded back, hinged to the gold circle. I stared at it, smiling at my luck. How long had it lain here? Perhaps it had belonged to an ancient queen. The little brooch was meant to be worn on a smooth linen lane or a fancy silk dress. It was a dainty ornament meant for a real nobleman's daughter, not for me. My father ruled our tooth, not dozens of Tootha, not a castle or an army of many clans. We owned nothing made of gold. Lara! Fallen was not closer, but she was shouting at the oak branches now. It was light enough for us to suspect that I was not in them. Fallen would take the golden brooch from me between one heartbeat and the next if she ever saw it. I traced the oval with my fingers, then touched it to my lips to feel the coldness of the metal. Shivering, I pinned the brooch inside the shoulder of my woolen brat next to my body, and clambered over the earthen wall on the far side of the keep. Then I ran for the woods. Chapter 2. I am restless and I graze apart from the others when the boys come to let us out each day. I feel strange, alert. I shy at birds flying past, at beads in the grass. This must have something to do with the fowl that lies inside my body. I escaped Fallen that day by working with Bevan and Garrock at cleaning the little byre that holds my mother's chickens. The offal we carried down to the fallow fields, holding our noses and laughing. Bevan has a cloud of hair the color of iron wrought. It looks like an orange halo in the right light and mats down like wet reeds when she is sweating. She must have gotten it from the fairies. The rest of us have brown hair that hangs heavily down our backs. We sing while we work, rearranging the words of old tunes until the older women scowl at us and click their tongues. We prank and tease and laugh out loud. Garrick has a laugh bright enough to turn a thunderstorm aside. I'm convinced that the saints, the fairies, and the old gods gave me these to make up for giving me Fallen. Bevan pretended to be St. Bridget, throwing bread to the poor people instead of a girl pitching chicken manure at bare dirt. Garrick laughed so hard I thought she might burst. Bevan can make anyone laugh. We scattered the manure thinly where the winter wheat was growing. Later the men would plow both wheat and offal under, churning it into the soil to rot slowly over the coming year. The fields ready for planting has been rested the same way last year. I wonder, I said as we trudged back up the hill, what it would be like to have a whole year to rest. Bevan and Garrick both stared at me, then Bevan began to laugh. Garrick caught the laughters from her, and they both laughed so hard their cheeks flushed pink. None of us could imagine it. We will work hard at high pasture, Bevan said as we dragged the next load down the hill. How strange it would be to be anywhere but right here, I said. Then we all fell silent, and I knew that they had the same mixture of excitement and fear in their bellies that I did. I avoided Fallen's anger that night by staying close to my mother all evening. The next morning I pretended to sleep a little late, opening my eyes a tiny slit, watching Fallen frown at me with dark eyes and a wrinkled brow as she left. I rose once she was gone, my stomach cramped with hunger. It was like this nearly every morning, and I knew that was part of Fallen's temper fits over her cracked comb. She was hungry most of the time. We all were. None among us ever had enough to eat this season of the year, and it would only get worse before it got better. From Imbolc, on the first of February, to Bellatane on the day of May. We were caught between the end of our winter stores and the beginning of our new food. Lambing began earlier than calving, and that meant the sheep would give milk, but it would be much less than the cows would later. Some years we were worse than others, and this was a bad one. My father had been gone most of the last summer fighting, then had left again not long after our celebration at Vinbolk and the passing of St. Bridget through the Tooth. You could not see her, of course, it was her spirit, but we left out things for her to bless. My mother had left out the biggest iron soup pot, as she always does. I put out my spindle, hoping it would spin faster so I could spend less time at a chore I hated. After my father left, and all his men with him, we only had a few aged men and the young boys to hunt for us. So meat was scarce, and we dared not kill many cows without my father's command. Once the 2-year bulls were gone, we lived on last year's oats and hard cheese. There wasn't much. As the days passed, all our bellies got flatter, curving inside of out. We had not been the only ones to eat our food, of course. The Tooth had paid shares of cheese and grain and meat to my father so that he could pay the Norman barony of Athenry. Until the Irishmen defeated the Normans, if they ever did, we would have to pay them. And all through the wet wintry months of Gam, we had to receive noble visitors if they came to us. We had quite a few this year. Lord Birmingham, the Norman Baron of Athenry, had sent us 2 groups of young noblemen off to explore the wild lands of Connemara. I wondered if any of them would end up fighting against my father if the battling continued once the weather warmed again. I wondered if any of them knew which Tuatha fought and which had accepted their rule. The first of the Normans had stayed with us for 2 days on their way west, resting their horses and asking all manner of questions about the deer in the forest and whether they used seaweed in our fields and so on. They had stopped to stay with us again coming home, eating heartily of our cheese and apples and meat, refusing pea soup, and asking for more mead until they dozed at the table. The second group had eaten as much and had been less interested in anything we had to say. Then a month after the feast day of Imbolc, when the weather was just starting to warm a little, 3 of them had come back. This time they had brought 2 priests who wanted to talk to my father. He had not been home, of course, and the old man had given the priest a story about my father being off hunting. The Normans had brought a spare horse and loaded it with our food for the clergyman. The visitors had all been a marvel to watch. I loved looking at the fineness of their clothes, the wrought gold and silver of their cloak pins and shoe buckles. Bevan and Garrick and I had hid one night beneath the table where the candlelight could not reach, listening to them talk about Athenry's banquets and horse races and the master builders working on the new stone wall and the abbey they were planning. Bevan finally giggled and got us caught, of course, but the truth was this: we had less meat than we needed when each set of visitors arrived, and much less when they left. 2 lambs born today, Fallon said one evening over our scant supper of boiled barley. It's time, my mother said in her quiet way. I sighed, relieved. Lambs meant that ewes would be milked soon. Fallon, as she did every year, left off her other work and went to help her Uncle Cathal, the weaver, who had kept more sheep than most. Each evening she brought home a half pail of ewe's milk. Mother and I drank our portions gratefully, and I tried to be nice to Fallon in return. She was still glaring at me, so it was hard. We all spun wool when we were otherwise idle. My mother was a fine spinner and had been a good weaver when she was younger, though she rarely used her straps and her loom now. Her hands ached from too many years of it. She wanted to teach me. I wanted to be outside with the horses if I had time without work already filling it, but I spun and spun. There was no task so mindless, so peaceful, so boring. By the 20th day, after Fallon had found her cracked comb, I began to worry less. Look at this, she said one evening, carrying in a full pail of ewe's milk. She set it on the little table near the fire. I thought she meant the milk, and I was about to exclaim over the joys of having a full pail instead of half, when she extended her left hand palm up toward my mother. Calais traded for my cracked one. He says he can use the carved part over again. It was a new comb. She glanced at me. I looked straight at her, not blinking, keeping my face blank. That's good, my mother said. She glanced between us, feeling the tension. I hadn't told her about the comb. I hated it when she tried to protect me from Fallen, and ended up with my father angry at her. He usually took Fallen's side against me. I am glad, I said, evenly as I could. I meant it, for a number of reasons, as you may imagine. I have to work for him 3 days, Fallon added. She glanced at me again. After lambing, I'll be cleaning raw bones he's had buried in dark soil all through the cold rains. My mother wrinkled her nose, but Fallon didn't see her, and I was grateful. I had done the same work once, trading for a brat clasp to fasten my brat tighter around my shoulders. It was terrible work, but old Kelleg was a kind-natured man and very skilled. His bone and antler carving was respected in other Tootha, not just our own. I could help, perhaps, I said, wanting to make amends in my own way. Fallon looked surprised. If you can be spared elsewhere, she said. I am sure the old man would welcome us both. I need her close just now, my mother said, saving me. Fallon nodded and sat down for supper. Early the next morning, my mother and I walked into the woods to gather dye-stuffs. Bevin and Garak saw us leave and only waved. They knew I would love to walk alone with my mother. She is a quiet woman, and I often ended up talking for two. But she is good company and sometimes tells the stories. When her hands had begun aching too much to leave, she had learned dye craft from Orlaith. She was now outdoing the old woman. Since men are never allowed to attend dyeing, Mother colors cloth when my father is not here. This means she and I can stay up half the night tending the little fires beneath the dye pots, talking and laughing without worry that he or any other man will come near the ruin the cloth. In the woods that day, Mother made me lead the way, testing what I had learned. We gathered bracken from its yellowish green, lady's bedstraw from the gray for the gray it imparted to linen, and the lichen that grows on the oaks for the lovely red-brown it gives when boiled with the cloth. We plant and grow our matter and our wood for red and blue colors we are not allowed to wear. The color laws are very strict. Free farmers can wear only dun brown, black, or yellow. Norman nobles, the lords to whom my father has to pay tributes and renders, wear red, gray, or dark brown. Above them there were the kings and queens, who wore blue and purple. My mother said a color that comes from some sea creature. Nothing has ever seemed sillier to me. Is a blue flower more noble than a yellow one? That afternoon I helped her pulp woad from the garden. It is simple to pulp wood woad properly. You pound it until your arms break. Bevin and Garrett came to help, and we fell asleep in a heap by the fire, tired both from work and from being silly. My mother covered us with woolen blankets to keep us warm, and we did not wake until noon the next day. Our mothers milked for us that morning.